welcome back everyone to part 8 of our Smart Enemy AI series. In this part, we're going to be creating a attack stance for our player. So we're going to have our player be able to move in this sort of magic attack state and do magic spells like this one, this Hadouken spell. And of course, these spells can damage the enemy. But we're also going to have the enemy able to block our attacks. Like that. Boom. So let me show you again. Oops, I missed. And again. Nice. So we're going to be creating this blocking state, this player attack state, and yeah, we'll be also adding this this widget you saw here, this crosshair in the center of the screen that allows me to aim my my projectiles. So let's get started. All right, so this is where we left off last time. We now have a damage system. Enemies have a health bar. They can do hit reactions, and they can even die. But so far what we've been doing is having both enemies attack each other. This time we'll add attacks to the player character, and we're also going to give the melee enemy the ability to block our attacks, or any attacks really. But before we get started, let me show you the animations that I'll be using. So over here in the animations folder, I cleaned it up a little bit, split it by rifle, melee, and magic, because all the animations were just in one folder, so this is a bit neater. And magic is the animations that we'll be adding to the player. So I have this magic idle, walk backwards, forwards, left, and right. And I also have this Hadouken attack. This is what we'll be using. And I created a blend space out of these movements. So this is what the magic state will look like when the player is in that state and moving. And as always, all of the assets, the animations will be, and yeah, of course, the whole project file will be available for free to download for all my patrons, and link down in the description. All right, so first thing we need to do is, let me delete this guy. So right now, the player doesn't have an attacking state. I want them to have this running state where they're doing the normal animations, and I want them to also have a sort of movement stance where they are ready to attack. And the biggest difference is that now when I move the camera, the player doesn't look in the direction where the camera is pointing. But for the attacking state, that will be very important because we want the player to be looking where the camera is aiming, and you'll see why. So let me start by opening up the player folder, open up the BP player, and I'm going to add a variable here, and I'm going to call this the stance, and it's going to be which stance the player is currently in. And for this, I'm going to create an enum. So right-click in the player folder here, search for enum, click on enumeration, and I'm going to call this player stance. And this is going to have two values. The first one is the default stance, and the second one is the magic stance. Now, if the player can have a ranged weapon, a melee weapon, and so on, we can add these to our player stance enum. And back here in our variable, I'm going to set this to be the player stance that we just created. And I'm going to compile so I can set a default value. Yeah, make sure that the default stance is set to default. Great. So now I want a way to switch between the magic stance and the default stance. So I'm going to create two custom events here. One, I'm going to call it magic stance, or yeah, enter magic stance. And I'm going to create another one, call it enter default stance. For now, what we're going to do is the magic stance sets the stance variable to magic, and default stance sets it back to default. All right, and I'm going to switch between them when I click the right click button. So I'm going to go here, right mouse button, And by the way, please don't add input actions like this. Please use the input action system when you map key presses to certain actions. This is this input action system that came with Unreal 5.2, which is really nice. But yeah, for the sake of the tutorial, I'm just using right mouse button. So when this is pressed, I will enter magic stance, and when it's released, I will enter the default stance. So as long as I'm pressing the right click, I'm in this magic stance. Now, the thing that I told you is important to do is in the magic stance, I want the player to look where the camera is looking. And to do that, you pull off of your character movement. By default, if I search here in the character movement for rotation, right now, orient rotation to movement is set to true, and use controller desired rotation is set to false. Now in the magic stance, we're going to flip these. So we're going to get orient rotation to movement, and we're going to set this to false, and set use controller desired rotation, we're going to set that to true. This is what allows the character to look where the camera is looking. And for the default stance, I'm just going to copy these, and we're going to flip them again. So this is true, and this is false. Great. So let's see what this looks like. So now I'm in default, everything's fine. If I hold the right mouse button, you see now the player moves where the camera is moving. But of course we don't have the animations yet, so she looks pretty weird. And if I let go of the right mouse button, then everything goes back to the default state. All right, so let's start adding our animations. So far, we've actually been using the default animation blueprint. So I'm going to make a copy and create one for the player. But I'm going to make a copy off of Manny because Quinn is just a child of Manny. So I want to create a copy of the base animation blueprint. So I'm going to copy this and call it ABP player. And I'm just going to set this here so I don't forget. This will be set to ABP player. And I'm going to go over this really quick because I don't want to spend too much time on animations, but I'll show you what needs to change here. All right. So first thing is focusing target. We don't need this variable. This was mainly for our enemies. But we do need a reference to our stance variable that we just created. So I'm going to pull off of here and say, well, actually, no, let's search for try get pawn owner. And we're going to cast this to our BP player. And off of BP player, we're going to get our stance. Then right click, promote this to variable, call it stance, and this is what we'll plug in here. Oh, sorry, plug it in here, and then this here. All right, so let me comment this and call it set stance. Just tidy it up a little bit. All right. So now we have a reference to this stance variable. Let's open our anim graph. For the leg IK, we're going to disable it if we are in the magic stance. So get stance and check if equal, the enum equal, and if it's equal to magic, and plug it in here instead of the is focusing target. So if we're disabling leg IK in a curve or the stance is magic, then set the alpha to 0, which disables leg IK. And again, if you don't know why I'm disabling leg IK, check part 1 of this series. All right, so for the idle, now we have 2 states, one for sword idle, one for the regular idle. We're going to replace this MM idle with MF because this is the female character. So MF idle, and you can just drag and drop it on here. Well, no, this one. Just drag and drop it on here and it will change. And is focusing target, we're going to change this check to if stance is equal, the enum equal to magic. So if this is true, we're going to use our magic idle. So search for magic idle and plop it on here. And if it's false, we're going to use the regular idle. All right, so we want to do the same for our walk run. Whoops. Change this. Stance equal to magic. In the true pose, we're going to use our magic blend space. And for this one, we're going to use the MF walk. Oh, where is it? MF unarmed walk run. All right, let's see if this works. So now I'm in my normal state, and if I press right click, great, now I'm in the magic state. But obviously the speed is too fast. We want to slow down the player in this magic state. So when we enter magic stance, let's also pull off character movement and say set walk speed, max walk speed to 170, I remember, is what I intended this animation to be for. And then when we go back to the default stance, we're going to set it back to the default, which is 500. Ideally, you wouldn't plug in these numbers right away here. You'd actually create variables for them. And let me do that, actually, so just to be doing things properly. I'm going to promote this to a variable and call it magic walk speed. And I'm going to promote this to a variable and call it default walk speed. It's always good to have these in variables and not just plugged in directly in your function. All right, so now this should look better. Yes, much better. Let's make it 200, actually. I think it's too slow. Okay, yeah, 200 is all right. Right now, one other thing I want to do is the camera boom. So right now, the player is in dead center of the screen. But if we want them to be aiming at the center of the screen, the player should be shifted to the left a bit so that we actually see where the center is. So to do that, I'm going to change the, click on the camera boom. Whoops, sorry, undo. Click on the camera boom and change the socket offset to be 60 on the y-axis and 30 on the z-axis. So yeah, now the player is shifted a bit to the left. Nice. All right, one other thing we want to do is in this magic state, we want there to be a crosshair in the center of the screen so we know where we're aiming at. So let's create a HUD for the player. So in our content folder, I already have a widgets folder because I imported the crosshair that I'll be using, and I got this from the Lyra starter pack. So this is free on the Unreal Marketplace. I'm going to leave the link in the description, but you can also get it from my Patreon. All right, so in widgets, I'm going to right click here and search for widget, widget blueprints, and select user widget. And we're going to call this player HUD. Open it up. First thing we want to do is get a canvas panel, plop it in here, and then search for image. We're going to get an image and plop it in here. The image, make sure to anchor it to the center, so it's always in the center of the screen. Set the position X to 0, position Y to 0. Size doesn't matter. You can set it to 0 as well. Actually, size, leave it as is, but we're going to change that in a bit. Alignment, make sure it's set to 0.5 on both the X and the Y, so it's perfectly centered. And for the brush, open up the brush and select our crosshair texture. Crosshair, yeah, that one. All right, and say size to content. That's why I said size doesn't matter, because yeah, we're going to click the size to content, and then the crosshair will be, the image will take the size of this crosshair. All right, now one thing you want to do, rename this, call it crosshair, and make sure the is variable is checked. Because now we're going to go to our graph and create two functions, one to show the crosshair and one to hide it, because we don't want to see it in the default stance, but we do want to see it in the magic stance. So in your functions here, click plus and say show crosshair. And all this will do is take the crosshair variable here, which is a reference to this image, and call set visibility on it, the function one, and make it visible. Now we're going to duplicate this function, call it hide crosshair, and visibility will be hidden this time. All right. Now back in our player, we want to create a function that shows the HUD first, and then a way to hide and show the crosshair. So I'm going to go custom events, call it display HUD. What this will do is it will create a widget of type player HUD, which is the widget we just created. And it's going to call add to viewport. All right. Now, one thing I want to do actually is, before adding it to viewport, let's promote it to a variable and call this player HUD ref. And I'm going to check before actually creating the widget here in the very beginning. I'm going to do a branch. Do I have, or actually no, don't do a branch. Get to your player HUD reference and convert it to a validated get. So if it is valid, all we want to do is just make it visible. So set visibility to visible. And if not valid, then we create it. Because if you call display HUD when there's already a valid HUD, we don't want to create a new one. We just want to show it. All right. I'm just going to comment this, call it HUD. And I'm going to comment these and call it stance or change stance. Okay. So up here in our event begin play, after we've set the health bar widget, let's call display HUD. So now if I play, I have a HUD and there's a crosshair. Great. But it's always visible and we don't want that. We only want it to be visible in the magic stance. So let's go back to our widget here, and in designer, click on the crosshair and have the visibility, search for visibility, and have it default to hidden. And back in our player, when we enter magic stance, we're going to get a reference to our player HUD and call show crosshair. And back in our default stance, we're going to hide crosshair. All right, so now default is false, no crosshair. Press right click, crosshair appears. Go back to default, crosshair gone. Nice. All right, so now that we have the player able to enter this magic stance and we have a crosshair that we can aim, now let's actually start adding our player attack. Now the attack I'm taking from the projectiles tutorial that I made, which I also integrated with the damage system tutorial, and it looks something like this. So we had a way of shooting projectiles and having them do damage to our enemy. So I'm going to open up my content folder, open up the projectiles, and everything here in this projectiles folder, actually except this projectile shooter, I don't want that. I'm going to migrate this. So right click, migrate. Yeah, sure, save. Yes, get the Infinity Blade assets, get the Paragon Gideon assets, get everything in the projectiles folder. Don't get the starter content, I already have that. And yeah, that's it. Then I'm going to select the enemy AI tutorial content folder, and no, don't override anything that already exists. All right, so back here, I should now have the projectiles. Where is it? Oh, crap. Yes, here it is. Sorry, never mind. So we have the projectiles. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to fire one of these projectiles, mainly this dark energy one, as our player attack, because I think this is the coolest looking one. Now I can go here into my player and say, on left mouse button, just spawn this projectile and shoot it in the enemy's direction. But I actually want to create a sort of attack system to make things a bit more reusable. So I'm going to go over here in my content folder. I'm going to create a new folder, call it attacks. And inside here, I'm going to create a blueprint actor component. So similar to the BPC damage system, which is an actor component, we're going to have an attack actor component and call this BPC attacks. And basically what is going to be in this actor component is all of the attacks that either the enemy or the player can do. And we're going to store them in this one place so that if we want to use a specific attack for the player or for the enemy, then we only have to implement it once and both can use it. All right, so I'm going to create a new custom event here and call it magic spell. This is going to be our projectile that we'll be shooting. And first thing we want to do is spawn actor from class. And I think this projectile is called dark energy. Yeah. And it expects to take a few things. Some things I'll make as input to this event, and some things I'll just default. So speed, for example, I'll say it's always 1000, gravity is always 0, and no target. Now spawn transform, this I want to be an input. So I'm going to drag it here and keep the name spawn transform. And owner, this is an important one. Who owns this projectile? And it's important because we want the projectile not to damage the owner. So if I spawn it, I don't want to be damaged by it. So to get the owner, which is the player, right click here and say get owner. And this will get the owner of this actor component, which will be whoever is actually calling this function. And then plug these here. I'm not going to have a target. It can be optional, so I'm going to put it here. If you do have a target, then the spawn transform, all that matters is the location. But if you don't have a target, then the rotation is also very important, and I'll show you why. All right, so for our projectile, we also have an event dispatcher called onProjectileImpact, and this is called when the projectile hits anything. And it gets me who was hit. So since this is an attack, I'm going to get the hit actor and call take damage on them. And the damage info, I'm going to make this an input to our magic spell event. And at the end here, we want to also dispatch an event saying that the attack is finished. So over here, call on attack ended, and we're just gonna call it here. It's also good to have an event dispatched when the attack begins. It's not very important, and I don't think we'll be using it, but let's just do it for good measure. On attack. Actually, never mind. I'm not going to do it. It's going to complicate things needlessly. But also one thing we want to do before calling on attack ended is that we want to report a damage event. So if you recall, report damage event is what allows the enemy to sense that they've taken damage. So the damaged actor is this other actor. The instigator is get owner. The damage amount will be pull off of damage info, say break, and get the amount. I'm also going to hide any pin that we don't use. And the event location is the actor location of the owner. And now we have this magic spell. Great. before we use it, let me actually show you what other attacks we can have here. So if you recall, in our BP enemy ranged, we have this attack that fires a bullet. Now we're also going to move this to our attacks actor component. So everything starting from the line trace, well, actually just the line trace and the damage. I think that's pretty much what we need here. Anything else? Nope. All right. So let's add a new attack here and call it custom event. Let's call it fire bullet. And paste. Let me just move this a bit down here. And paste what we just copied. So the start, I'm going to make this an input and call it trace start. The end, make it also an input and call it trace end. By the way, if you don't know, if you drag a pin and drop it on the event, it will make a an input parameter for it. All right. What else? The damage info, of course, right here. Make this an input. And actually, I want to change this a bit, because what this is doing is it does a line trace from a start to an end, and if it doesn't hit anything, then it calls damage. And in the ranged, we had a target, right? So we'd always call damage on this target. But if we want this attack to be a generic attack that anyone can use, we won't always have a target. So I'm going to change this a bit. Instead of line trace by channel, I'm going to do line trace for objects. And the reason is because I want the object type here, so make array. I want this to always be pawn. So whatever I hit here will be a pawn. And why do I want it to be a pawn? Because right now only pawns implement the damageable interface. So I want to make sure that the actor I'm getting implements the damageable interface. And I'm going to plug everything else here. But now the difference is, oh, don't forget the start and the end. Now the difference is I'll only take damage if I hit the actor. So I'm going to do a trace from a start to an end. And if I do hit the pawn that I'm trying to hit, I'm going to call take damage on that pawn. So pull the out hit, say break hit, get the hit actor, and this will be the target for our take damage. Over here, we also want to do report damage event in case the player wants to use this. This will be the damaged actor. Get owner will be the instigator. Damage amount, get the damage info, break it, and put the amount. And the actor location of the owner. Whoops, wrong one. Get actor location. This will be the event location. Just hide this. All right, so now we also have this fire bullet. Let me show you how to use this fire bullet instead of what we already have. So in our ranged, I'm going to delete all of this. And I'm going to add the actor component to, actually I'm not going to add it to the range, I want to add it to the base enemy. So go over to your BP enemy base, add BPC attacks here, compile, and now it should also be available for the ranged enemy. So pull off of, no, not damage system, pull off of BPC attacks and call fire bullet. So the trace start will be the actor location of the weapon, and the trace end will be the location of our target. So if I do a trace from the weapon to the target and I do hit them, then they will take damage. And for the damage info, I'm going to say make damage info, and I think it was set to 15 and projectile. All right, so this is actually how you use this function. Let's make sure that it's working as expected. So back here, let's get our ranged enemy and let's have them fight. All right, so everything's working as expected. He's shooting and doing damage. So this works well. I'm gonna delete him, don't need him anymore. So now back to our player. Now, how do we use this magic attack? So this magic spell, again, for the player, all we need to do is add in the components the BPC attacks. Pull off of the BPC attacks and call magic spell. Now, this is going to be slightly tricky because we need to set the location and rotation of this projectile. Now, the location is going to be the hands of the player, but the rotation, it has to be rotating to where the camera is pointing. But before we do that, I actually forgot to show you the montage that we'll be using. So back here in our animations, magic, this Hadouken montage. So I'm not gonna, I already have created the montage before because we've created a lot of montages throughout the series, so I don't have to show you how to create it. But I will show you what I'm doing is that in the very beginning, I'm spawning this Gideon effect, which came with the Paragon Gideon asset. Looks pretty cool on the hands here. So this is the one I'm using. And once, well, sorry about that. And once we reach this point in the animation, this is where I call the fire montage, the montage notify called fire. All right, so as always, how do we play a montage? We call play montage in our mesh. And let's select our Hadouken montage. And once we off of notify, select switch on name, connect it to on notify begin, remove the default pin, add a new pin called fire. I think that's what I called it, right? Fire, yes, fire. And when fire happens, this is when we do our magic spell. I don't have a targeting system, so target is going to always be empty, but let's make a damage info, say does 20 damage or something, and projectile damage. And let's say can be blocked, because this is what we'll have the enemy blocking later on. And hide unconnected pins. Well, why did it... Oh, that's fine. Anyway. Now the spawn transform, if you right click and say split, this takes a location, rotation, and scale. Now the location is easy. It's the location of the player's hand. Now to get that, I'm going to get the mesh and say get socket transform, or get socket location, because I only need the location. And the socket is the name of the bone, which is hand underscore L. Let me make sure. Also click the mesh, double click it to open, and search for hand. Yeah, it's hand underscore L. Now you can use L or R, doesn't matter. And we're going to plug this into our location. But to get the rotation, we need to actually get where the camera is pointing. And you can't, well, let me show you. If we just say, if we pull off of our camera and just say get forward vector. Now this is a location, right? But you can say make rotator. Sorry, no, not make rotator. You can say find look at rotation. And this takes a start and a target and gives you a rotation. So the start is where our hand is. So I'm just going to use that one. But our end is not the forward vector of the camera, but the forward vector of the camera multiplied by some number. So we're going to get that, and we're going to multiply it by the range that we want the trace to end. So right click, convert this to a float, and let's say 10,000. Large number is all right. And we need to add this to the current location of the camera. So you have to say get world location of the camera and add this to that. And this will be the end of your, oops, sorry, let me move this away here. All right, and this will be the end of your look at rotation. So now when we press the left mouse button, this is what happens. Let's test it out. So right here, I click the left mouse button. Well, a few issues. First of all, the montage isn't playing. And it is going to the right location, but yeah, the montage isn't playing. Let's try to understand why. Montage. Ooh, this is a mistake. This slot should be default slot, not upper body slot. I don't know why it was set to upper body. All right, so now, there we go. Montage is playing, and we are shooting in the right location. And if we shoot the enemy gets damaged. Nice. Now he's not attacking me because I don't think we had on damage react or do something. But if they see me, I can attack. Boom. Die. Now this is another issue. We can move while shooting it. I don't want that. So I'm going to disable movement while this montage is playing. So let's go to our player. Actually, I'm going to take all of this and create a custom event and call it magic spell or shoot magic spell. And then when we press the left mouse button, we just call this shoot magic spell. That's a bit cleaner. All right, so we don't want the player to be able to move in this state. So we're going to create a new variable, call it can move, and this is going to be a float, a boolean. And over here, we're just going to set it to false. And once the montage finishes or is interrupted, we're going to set it back to true. Now, this variable doesn't do anything yet. We need to have it do something. So over here, where we have our movement input, I'm going to first check if the player can move before doing anything. So do a branch, check if can move is true. Whoop. And only then do your movement input. And that's basically it. So now the player, if I compile and save, if I'm moving, oh, the player can't move at all because it should default to true. So make sure the player can move by default. All right, so now I'm moving, and if I do the montage, oh, now it stops. Great, and then I move again. One thing though is that if I'm in the normal default stance, I can still do the montage. I don't want that. I only want the montage to play in the magic stance, because right now I can do this and look here, see what happens. We don't want that. So back here, before doing our shoot magic spell, I'm gonna check if, let's get our stance, say equal to magic. Only then do the rest. And that's it. Let's comment this, call it magic spell. And there's also another issue. I don't think you can tell, but in some cases the projectile actually attacks the player themselves. This is because I forgot one very important thing in the magic spell attack here, which is to tell it to ignore the owner. How do we do that? After we spawn the projectile here, get a reference to it, and call ignore actor when moving on the box collision. Very important that it's on the box collision, because that's what collides. Let me move all of these a bit down here. So the actor we want to ignore is the get owner again. Sorry, let me tidy this up a bit. All right, so now this shouldn't happen anymore. Now it's actually happening more. Oh, should ignore should be true. Sorry. Yeah. There we go. If you didn't see the tutorial for the projectile system, I'm just going to show you real quick that I also call this ignore actor when moving in the projectile itself, but it's important to call it in both. You can even see here that in the description it says component on the other actor may also need to be told to do the same when they move. So this is important. All right, so now that we have the player able to attack and damage the enemy, next thing we want to do is allow the enemy, the melee enemy, oops, he killed me, allow the melee enemy to be able to block the player's attacks. So let's see how we can do that. Let me close a few of these things here. Close, close, close. And I just need the enemy for now. All right, so I have two animations I want to show you. For the melee, we have block. We have this sword block. This is just a sort of blocking state. And we have sword block react, which looks like this. So if the enemy is blocking, they're going to hold the first pose. If they successfully block something, then we're going to play this second animation. And I have montages created out of both of them. The block one doesn't have anything special, just disables leg IK. But the block react one has this sound and also this muzzle effect to make it more visible that the enemy blocked something. So let's, in our BP enemy melee here, create some blocking functions. So over here, get a custom event and say, call it start block. Now, one thing you should know about the damage system, if I right click and edit my damage system, is that it has an isBlocking variable. And if this variable is true, it's going to block the damage, call onBlocked, this event dispatcher onBlocked, and it won't take any damage and say was damage is false. So the first thing we want to do here back in our enemy is to pull off of our damage system and set isBlocking to true. Nope, not get. Set isBlocking to true. That way they block any incoming damage that is a blockable damage. By the way, if I open my player again here, if you recall, I set our damage to be blocked here. So if this was false, then isBlocking won't do anything. So I'm going to set it to true to make sure that our attack can be blocked. All right, back here in our melee enemy, after setting isBlocking to true, we want to play the montage in our mesh components, and we're going to play the sword block montage. Oh, one thing to also know about the sword block montage is that I have it loop twice because initially it was a lot shorter. So I want it to be slightly longer because the duration of the montage is going to dictate how long the enemy can hold the blocking state. So just so you know, I made it loop twice, so it's longer. Now, we don't have any notifies because nothing happens in the montage itself. But once isBlocking is set to true, this on our damage system, we can do something on blocked. So I click the damage system and click on the on blocked event, or like I showed you before in the begin play, you can say pull off the damage system and say assign on blocked, and then this will do the same thing here. So I'm going to do it the simpler way for this one. So if we block something, we want to play another montage. And the montage this time is the block react, this one. All right, and then after that, we want to end the block. So I'm going to create a new custom event here, call it end block. And basically what it's going to do is set isBlocking to false. Do we want it to do anything else? For now, that's enough, but we still need to do a few more things. On completed, once this start block finishes, we want to call end block as well. And on interrupted, so if the enemy is blocking and something interrupts them, we want them to end the block. Unless that something is this montage. Because if you play a montage while another one is playing, it will interrupt it, and interrupt will be called. So we don't want this montage to cause an interrupt and end the block. So we're going to check. We want to check if what interrupted us is this event. And to do that, I'm going to create something called a blocking state, which is a variable called blocking state here in our melee enemy. And this is also going to be an enum. So right click here in the enemies folder, search for enum, call it blocking state. And we're going to have 3 states, either none, you're not blocking, or you are in the process of blocking, or you have blocked successfully. Back here in our enemy, no, this is the player. In our melee enemy, the blocking state will be E_blocking state. And when we start the block, we're going to set the state to be blocking. Once we successfully block, we're going to set the state to be successfully blocked. And when we end the block, we're going to set the state back to none. Now, what this allows me to do is that on interrupt, I can check if blocking state get blocking state is not equal to blocked successfully. Let me do a branch here. If that's the case, then interrupt and call end blocked. So on interrupt, if the blocking state is anything other than blocked successfully, then call end block. Otherwise, don't call end block because we're going to play this montage, and then this montage is what's going to call end blocked, either on completed or on interrupted. Here it doesn't matter. All right, so now that we do have our blocking states, we actually need the enemy to know that there's an incoming attack before blocking. Now, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. It depends on your game and what type of attacks the enemy is trying to block. If they are trying to detect whether an arrow is coming at them, it's very different than if they're trying to detect whether the player is doing a specific spell or something. Now for our use case, I'm going to make it simple, and I'm going to open up the damageable interface. So in the damage system, open up BPI damageable, and anyone that implements the damageable interface should also implement a function called isAttacking. And this function, all it does is returns a Boolean value called attacking, whether attacking is true or false. Let me show you how we're going to use that. So in our player, if we go back here under interfaces, we should have a new function called isAttacking. And we're going to create a variable for the player called attacking. And we're going to set this to the return value of this function. And now back in our event graph, as soon as we do this shoot magic spell, well, not as soon as, actually, only if we are in the magic stance, we're going to set the attacking variable to true, which means that if someone called isAttacking, it will return the value of true. And otherwise, after complete or interrupt, set attacking back to false. Oh, sorry, back to false, not true. All right. And let's do the same for our base enemy. So in our enemy base blueprint, let's add a variable called attacking. And in the interfaces, search for isAttacking and just get this variable. And let's also open up our ranged enemy. Over here, let's set attacking to true. And over here, let's set it back to false. Excellent. So now how do we use this in our behavior tree for the melee enemy? Back in our enemies AI folder, open up the behavior tree. So right now we have our attacking state, we have this strafe state. Now we want a new state for blocking, and it's going to be of higher priority than the attack. So it's going to be somewhere here. And since this is a selector, it selects between the attacking state, if it's not on cooldown, the strafe state otherwise. But we need a decorator to tell us if we're being attacked or not. So I'm going to go over here and create a new decorator off of a blueprint base, put it in the decorators folder, call it btd is target attacking. And it only checks if their current target is attacking them or not. If someone else is attacking them, they're not going to block. Of course, you can change this if you want them to block damage from anyone or any incoming damage. For my case, only the target, and they're going to block their damage. So override perform conditional check AI as always, and get the controlled pawn and get isAttacking. Oh, sorry, not the controlled pawn. We want to get the target. So in our variables here, add a reference, attack target key, make this a blackboard key selector, and make sure to click the eye icon. Then we're going to get value as actor. And this actor, we're going to check if isAttacking or not. And the target of isAttacking is our damageable interface. So if isAttacking, we're going to return true. Otherwise, we're going to return false. And that's it for this decorator. Now let's go over here in our tree, make some room. And on the left of the attack, because it's higher priority than the attack, we're going to create a new sequence of actions and call it block. And we're going to add the decorator here called isTargetAttacking. Great. Now, don't forget to set the attack target to our attack target. Great. Now, if we're blocking, first thing we want to do is maybe focus on the target that we're blocking the attack from. And then we want to call the block event that we created in the enemy. So to do that, we need a task for it. So let's create a new task off of blueprint base, put it in our tasks folder, and call it melee block. I'm going to specify melee because only the melee enemy can block. So over here, override event receive execute AI, call finish execute. And what we're going to do is we're going to cast this time. So cast the pawn to our melee enemy, because again, only the melee has access to this block event. And we're going to call start block. Now we only want to finish execution when end block is called. So we need to dispatch an event for when this happens. So back here in our melee, no, where's our melee? Did I close it? Let me just open it. Okay, so back here in our melee, once end block is called, we're going to scroll down to event dispatchers, add a new event, call it on block ended, and just call this here. Compile and save. Back in our task, now I can pull off of our BP enemy melee and call assign on block ended, and we're going to call this end execution, and we're just going to call finish execution here. So now we start the task, we call start block, and we only finish the task, and make sure success is true when on block is called. So back here in our behavior tree, let's just call melee block. All right. And one important thing also is that for the observer aborts on the is target attacking decorator, we want it to abort only lower priority. That means if you're doing something and an attack is incoming, stop what you're doing and start blocking. We are not setting it to both, because if you're in the blocking state and your target is no longer attacking, we don't want you to stop blocking right away, because maybe they're going to attack again in like half a second or something. So remain in your blocking state until block is over. And also one thing, we're going to add a cooldown to this. So add a cooldown decorator. Let's say you can only block every 2 seconds. Now you can decide to do this based on a cooldown, or you can decide to do it based on a percentage or a chance. So you can say generate a random number. If it's below 0.5, then block. So that means there's a 50% chance you'll block. For me, I'm just going to do it based on cooldown. And yeah, let's test this out. So the enemy pulls out their sword. I'm going to attack. Ooh, they blocked right away, but they're still. If you notice, they were still moving while blocking. So if they're moving and I attack, yeah, they're still sliding while blocking. So one thing we should do is now we can do it here. I think if we just set movement speed to idle, this will stop that from happening. Let's have the enemy start facing us. Yeah, okay. So now if I attack, and they're moving, and I attack. Oh, nope. Why aren't you blocking? Okay, yeah. So he stopped, and then he blocked. Let's try it again. He's moving. Yes, perfect. Great. So block is working as expected. Nice. All right, now let's actually make sure that the ranged enemy also gets their attacks blocked. Let's see. Oh, he did not. Actually, he is doing the block montage, but the attacks aren't being blocked. And that's probably because in our ranged enemy here, we didn't set, yep, can be blocked was false. So now can be blocked is true. Let's see. Nice. All right, so the melee enemy is now getting much stronger. Now, one thing I noticed actually is that when he blocks my attacks, he starts blocking a lot earlier. I want him to only block once I fire the projectile, so it looks a bit more like they're reacting in real time. So I'm just going to go back here to the player and remove is attacking from here. And instead, I'm going to put it right here after the fire. So as soon as fire is called, then I'm going to set attacking to true. Now let's see how this looks like. Ooh, yes, much better. Boom. Nice. Alright, now as a little added bonus, I want to, in our player here, I want to add something. So when we change stance to magic, I want to zoom in, like we know when you're aiming down sight of a gun, the camera zooms in. So I want to add that functionality. Now to do that, you can just get your camera boom and say set offset, target, was it target offset? Which one were we using? No, socket offset. Set socket offset. And I tried these values before. I think it was 200 on the X, 65 on the Y, and 45 on the Z. I think that worked. And then when you switch back to your default states, put it back to 0, 60, and 30. Whoops, this was 0. 0, 60, yeah. And let's also promote these to variables. So promote to variable, call it aim boom offsets. And promote this to variable and call it default boom offset. All right, so let me show you what this looks like. Now if I play and I press right click, see, now it zooms in, but it doesn't do it smoothly. Let's add some smoothing to it. And to do that, I'm going to create a timeline. And for those who don't know what timelines are, right click, say add timeline, add timeline. And timelines are basically a way that allows you to do something over time, or change a value over time. So I'm going to call this the aim timeline and plug it in from play from start. Now double click the timeline to open it. And the length, first of all, is going to be, let's say, 0.3. I want this to happen pretty fast in 0.3 seconds. Add a float track, call it the aim alpha. And I'll show you why I call it alpha. It's because it's going to have values from 0 to 1 only. So right click and add a key at time 0. It's going to have a value of 0. Right click, add another one at time 0.3, which is the max. It's going to have a value of 1. And I'm going to select both these points, right click and say auto to just make the curve a bit smooth. And back in my event graph, basically what I've done here is now I have a value that changes between 0 and 1. So I want this value to be interpolated to my aim offset. So to do that, I'm going to pull off of this and say lerp, or linear interpolate. And basically this linear interpolate takes two values, a from value and a to value, and then an alpha. And based on the alpha, which is between 0 and 1, if it's 0, it picks A, if it's 1, it picks B, and anything in between, it picks a value in between. So our A here is our default boom offset, our B is our aim boom offset, and we're going to plug this in on update. So this alpha keeps changing over time, which means it's going to keep moving from the default to the aim over time as well. And in the enter default stance, when we're done, what we want to do is reverse all of this. So to reverse it, get a reference to aim timeline, just say get aim timeline, and call reverse on it. And that's pretty much it. Let's see how this looks. Nice. So now it's very smooth. Boom, Hadouken. Awesome. Thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed this part. And in the next part, I think I'm going to be focusing on getting the enemy to forget the player. So if the player gets out of line of sight or moves a far enough distance, then the enemy goes back to their passive or patrolling state. Because I got a lot of requests from people asking how to get the enemy to forget or stop chasing the player. So we're probably going to do that. And if you have any requests on how I should take this tutorial series further, if there are specific things that you want to see, please let me know. And because I'm kind of debating between whether to keep adding more smart behavior to the current enemies, or should I create new enemy types like a defensive enemy, a magic enemy, maybe even a boss fight. So let me know in the comments what you think, and yeah, see you in the next one.